Louis J. first came to my attention back in 2018 when he sent me a copy of his book Passing Fancies. Comprised of 64 black and white photographs printed in a beautiful duotone, the subject matter in this book spans the globe from Rio to Miami to Paris and Sicily. The book is absolutely gorgeous, and Louis's abilities as a photographer left a major impression on me. Then, a little over a year ago, Louis sent me this collection, which is a beautiful portfolio of handmade black and white prints featuring portraits shot in Marrakech. He printed each of these images out using the paisography process on Italian watercolor paper. It was a beautiful profile, but what I didn't know is that this portfolio is part of a much larger project being shot in Morocco that Louis had been working on for a number of years. So he has now released the culmination of this work in this beautiful book called Marrakech Face to Face. This was printed at Brilliant in Exton, Pennsylvania, and the book is a gorgeous quad tone featuring a foreword by none other than Ralph Gibson. I had the opportunity recently to sit down with Louis and talk to him about this project and get a little bit of behind the scenes, and I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did doing it. So without further ado, this is Louis J. We'll go back to the beginning on this, and I want to talk about your interest in Marrakech and how that came up. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, what happened was, as a young man in 1974, I was backpacking around Europe with my best friend, and we were in Spain, and we decided, hey, let's go to Morocco. So we were touring Morocco, and of all the amazing towns there, I mean, we were in Fez, Meknes, not Casablanca, but Tangier. A lot of just incredible places, but the one place that really kind of got etched in my mind was Marrakech. It just the people, the scenes, the architecture, the whole mood there, it just stayed with me. So, but this happened like a year before I decided to become a photographer. I did not have a camera at this time. So a year later, ended up studying photography in London. I bought my first Leica and M4 film camera at that time, and I launched, a whole photographic journey. And almost 50 years later, my wife's French, and we kept an apartment in Paris. And on a trip in 2022, I said, well, I want to go back to Marrakech, a city that, stayed with me all this time and this time photographed. He said, sure. So that's what happened. And I really, in a week of solid shooting, I got such uh, good photos for me, in my opinion, that I decided, all right, well, maybe this is a project. Maybe I'll embark on a book. And what happened was, while the process of editing and design work with my graphic designer Sally and uh, Ralph Gibson ended up getting involved in writing the foreword, which was fantastic. I decided in March of this year to go back and get some more shots, another week. So two-thirds of the photos were really done in the first trip, but that one-third from going back really helped, I think. Uh, I was able to pick up a lot of things that I wanted for the book, like music, some of the music shots, musicians, and some other things, um, which really helped the editing a lot, I think.
Well, Lois, one of the things that really impressed me about the flow of the book and how it works out, and it's interesting too. I guess this is a two-part question. When you're going through that process of culling work, and you have that relationship with the work, and then you have a calling to go back. What I really love, though, is the pacing. It's not just a collection of portraits, or it's not just this or that, or street photography. It really tells a story, and I like, you open the book, and it opens with this panoramic shot. It's got a very
Right.
film vibe to it.
Right,
You
right.
have a background in filmmaking, right?
Yeah, well, I did study as a young man. When I got back to New York after studying in London, I entered New York University Graduate Film Institute, and I had a really great mentor, a cinematographer named Beta Botka, who was just, incredible cameraman and with lighting and everything. And I graduated and I wanted to become a cinematographer, and I was working as an assistant for a few years, but I kind of got fed up with the whole union situation and went back to still photography. So yeah, I have a filmmaking background and appreciation for that, which I guess I've tried to incorporate in my still work as well. But I think it's interesting that you perceived, the rhythm of the book, because it definitely has what I would call some sections and a certain flow, and that big square, which is the main square, which kind of opens that whole first section, which is more kind of street shots. I was trying to really establish the kind of the chaos of the Medina, the old city, which all these photographs were done in the Medina. And from there, I go on to the portraits, and the portraits are, in kind of sections after that. They're the close portraits. And then I get into some of the souks, the stands, and the trades, and the more environmental portraits mixed in. And then, into kind of like specific trades and craftspeople, like the water seller, the snake charmer, or the woman weaver. So um, it really I tried to make a kind of interesting flow in that way.
There's a quote that you've got in here that I want to read because I think you can probably expand on it too. It says, "The souks of Marrakesh are not just markets, they're living theaters where the characters are traders, the currency is wit, and every detail tells a tale." And I think it's so beautiful in the context of photography because it seems like that's really one of the things you're drawn to in this section.
Yeah, absolutely. The tradespeople and their specialties. I think that was to the side of the henna tattoo artist, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, I mean, it really is a theater. I mean, the square there, the famous square, which the translation uh, of Gemma al-Fana, I believe is how it's pronounced, literally means a square. It's been translated to Square of the Living Dead, and it's a showplace with jugglers and all kinds of food stands, juice bars, and rickshaws and motorbikes are crisscrossing it. It's kind of this incredible organized chaos, and that's where you'd find some of the people like the henna tattoo artist or the snake handlers, things like that. But it's a very difficult area to photograph people, in my opinion, because it's open. And for me, I really liked a more controlled setting of either the person against their souk, their stand, or a kind of a neutral background. So when I got some of the people, like the snake handler, I would kind of, or the water, so I would take them away from the open air. And the lighting, of course, is very harsh, and go against a neutral wall. And then the majority, of course, is in the souks and the little markets and the alleyways of the Medina, in the different neighborhoods of the Medina. So it's a very rich uh, place to photograph. Uh, I think that's probably so much. I mean, I know so much has been done about Marrakesh, but mostly in color because it's a colorful city that had that terracotta sand-like stone in the buildings and everywhere. So I could see why people would photograph it, but I'm very much a black and white person.
Well, that
So
brings me to a question I wanted to ask you actually, because it is interesting because when you think of definitely a place like Marrakesh being very vibrant in color, I think it's interesting that you interpret this completely in black and white. Did you
yeah,
kind of, is
absolutely.
this from your early days when you started with the Leica or what's your,
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I do photograph some things in color, some projects. Like when I go to Rio, I just happen to see Brazil and Rio where I shoot in color. But most of the stuff I'm really drawn when I'm in Italy and Paris and here in Marrakesh to black and white. And also, I really thought that these portraits would lend itself to the printing process, which I've been running in my studio here in Miami of pisography, which you alluded to in that portfolio I sent you, which is a really beautiful monochromatic process. I wouldn't call it black and white because they're tones that you could
Mhm.
add in there. It's
Right.
kind of a split toning process. I studied, in a workshop several years ago with John Cohn, the inventor of pisography, up in the middle of nowhere in Vermont. And then, just spent some time in my studio testing papers and all these combinations of the split tones and what would work. And I came up with a look for the Marrakech portfolio. So, choosing black and white, I think it really was what I was looking for,
Mm.
and especially going to the end product of making prints from it. And the book reflected that as well.
Just to back up real quick for those who might not know, who might be watching this, that pysography, essentially John Cohn was the inventor. It's
Right,
more or less a way of, with specific Epson inkjet printers, of being
right,
able to, they have multiple ink cartridges for various colors. I think it's up to nine. I can't remember the specific
right.
number. And so
They're
what
about,
the
yeah.
hack is, so to speak, is that you remove all the color cartridges and you put various tones and shades of monochrome or black and white in there. And then
Exactly.
if it will go towards, because I saw this in your portfolio, it goes towards warm or cool tones depending on what you want to do. So it's a way of
Exactly.
digitally mimicking what a darkroom process might be, and it has a great look to it. I mean, the I'll show some in the B-roll when we do this, but
Yeah.
the prints that you sent me that you did in Pysography were just gorgeous. Now, this doesn't really translate into doing a book, and so it's a different process now for that, but it's also
Sure.
very interesting also.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, what happened when doing the book was that when I approached Bob Tursek from Brilliant Graphics, who might be one of the best,
I think so.
photography book printers in the United States. Um, yeah, he's just a master of matching ink and different papers. And so I sent him some small prints, pisographic prints, and he got back to me and said, "Look, I see this as quad tone,
Mm.
four, two blacks, two probably warm grays on uncoated paper," and even mentioned this Italian paper. So right away, he had a feel for it. And honestly, after going there and going through the print run, uh, and dealing with the pre-press and the whole process, I think he really was able to get very close to what I was trying to achieve with the pisography prints. He really, in my opinion, did a great job.
Yeah, he's been on the channel before. I did an interview with him when he was doing one of Ralph's books. I had never met Bob before, and he owns Brilliant, which is this amazing printer that goes back to his dad, actually, up in Pennsylvania. And the two things that really clued me into Bob and his talent were, one, he is a huge collector of photography books. He's a photographer himself and knows the genre. He knows all the genres of photography books. And he's the kind
Right.
of guy, if you call him and he'll say, "Oh yeah, you want to go on French press, white, two-tone ivory." He does all the papers and everything, and he knows how to
Yeah,
get that look.
absolutely. Absolutely. They do, Brilliant Graphics does, I got to see a lot of stuff on press or lying around, waiting to be bound and things. A lot of commercial stuff like any good printer, catalogs and brochures, but that's his passion. He loves photography and he loves the photo book. So,
Well, and some people, if you've seen that video, you might remember because I showed just a little bit of the behind the curtain on that. But you when you go up to do a book with Brilliant, like you did, you'll work with there's several technicians. I mean, these are huge machines that they work with.
oh yeah.
And what was the process like? To essentially, you come in with a vision, and you've done all those prints. So, I mean, you were clearly expressing what that is, and so
Right.
essentially the process is translating that vision into the final product. What was that
Sure.
like working with you?
Well, you go up there, and I was up there 3 days with my graphic designer, Sally, and basically the first day, you go over with his pre-press guy. I think Peter is his name, who's really good at what he does on a very good calibrated monitor, and he kind of shows you what he did to get it ready for the plates for the press and any adjustments you might want to make, which in my case were really very few because he really he really got the thing.
Yeah.
He had Bob gave him the prints that I'd sent over as very good reference. And then from there, the next day, 2 days of, running it, and they would come out with a broadsheet, of what is it like? I can't remember, 16 up on a page, I
Yeah, I
think.
think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and you basically in a light box area at the end of the conference room, Peter would come out, Bob, you know, Sally, my graphic designer, is there. You look at it, and if everything looked great, I'd sign it, and they run it. And a few I wanted to looked a little bit, a photographer would say hot, a little bit light maybe, or highlights were starting to go. So a few I'd say, can we add ink? And they say, yeah, and they bring a second sheet. So that happened a few times. And basically from there, it's just letting the thing rip, letting it run.
Yeah, but the results are absolutely phenomenal. And, when you get a good printer like that, and just to iterate too, I think one of the things that they do so well is, you've been in the commercial business for a long time. You've done press checks.
Yeah.
There are certain printers who they just, there's a technical expertise. And all, but those guys are really good at like, okay, Lewis wants to see this a certain way.
Right.
And we're going to interpret that as we go through. And what you can do with black and white when you do something like quad tone or something, it's not unlike pisography in that respect.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, what helps is that even before I got up to Pennsylvania, I had, and Bob sent me, he said, pick your 8 images you want to test.
Mm.
And he sent me a proof from the same paper, the same quad tone. And it got delayed because he didn't like the results of the first one. And
Wow.
then he sent me the one he thought looked good. I got it and I said, yeah, this looks great. So, a lot of it is kind of to a certain degree done already. And, in the end result, I was very happy with it. Yeah.
Let me ask you this, just going back to content again with Marrakech, there's a couple of things I wanted to ask you about. First of all, like, with the people you encountered in there, your pictures have it's a very intimate relationship the way you shoot with the people, and you get the eyes and you get the whole thing. Are people fairly open to working with a Westerner when you go over there, or was that a little
Well,
tricky? Or
it can be tricky. My working method is first of all, I have a guide, okay, and that's essential in a place like the Medina because obviously a more touristy souk or stand in a market that sells spices, for example, they might speak English. A lot of people speak French there, being a former French protectorate. But a lot of people don't speak English. So guide is fundamental. And so I had guide both times. He'd meet me at the hotel. We'd get up early, start shooting. And so I would brief the guide on my working methods. And look, I'd let him know right away, I'm not interested in tourist things, and let him know this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for these interesting faces. And, they would stop people. I say, hey, this is kind of interesting. And I think your approach in a place like that is very important. I mean, I have certain camera handling uh, protocols, which, I try to be ready. I use for all the tighter portraits, I use the same lens, a 50 millimeter,
Hmm.
which I'm very comfortable with. And I like its perspective and the proportions I get from it. And I try not to waste their time. Time is precious.
Right.
And so I get in there and I try to get the shots quickly. And I think the other thing is in a city, in a place like this, the photographer's demeanor and attitude is very important. I try to be humble. I try to be thankful, and respectful of the people, their culture and customs. Empathy is important.
Hmm.
And I think eventually they feel that, because I try to put them at ease. And we might not be able to speak the same language, but they do feel your vibe
Hmm.
in a lot of times. So really that's an important aspect of the thing. So, I divided the book into this 50 millimeter, what I'd say more formal portraits where I had cooperation, obviously. And the guide is very helpful in that. And then, I was using a Leica Q with its 28 millimeter, the monochrome Q, for the environmental portraits because I wanted to show
Mm.
sometimes the souk and things like that. And then also for street shots, which, weren't, you know, with formal portrait type permission, that kind of thing to
You're
get me
waiting for a moment, let's say, or something.
right.
Yeah.
Right. So it was kind of a combination. But honestly, this whole thing of respect, and that has to be transmitted by the guide. And I was fortunate. Both guides I had were really very tactful, really wonderful, in this aspect.
That's great.
Yeah.
I wanted to make that comment. First of all, there's two things that surprised me on this. I mean, I was talking about this, well, I use the word intimacy, but I mean, there's a connection between the photographer and the sitter and in those
Sure.
portraits. I didn't realize that was a 50. I swore you were using a 90 or something like that, just because of the comfort of the depth. So you really are kind of up close in those.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, there's also the physical elements of where you're shooting. Other than the big square, which is open and vast, many of the markets and the subjects are in these little alleys.
Mm.
So they're very narrow. And what I would say is that the shooting circumstances can be very haphazard because unless you've really been to Marrakech or any of these other North African cities in a Medina, a busy marketplace and, people going through, buying and you have motorbikes going through with no regard for pedestrians, okay? Donkeys or asses hauling goods and sometimes trash. That's how they get it in and out. And sometimes there'd be even guy before the donkey with a cart yelling in Arabic, we're coming through, we're coming through. So backing up with a longer lens, like a 75 or 90, can really be haphazardous. Fortunately, my guide would usually, if he wasn't talking to someone on the side, always have my back and, say, take care, or, there's a motorbike going through and that kind of thing. So the 50 is not only millimeter, what I'm really comfortable with and do a lot of my shooting, but also in terms of the practicality of the space. You
Understood.
know,
Yeah.
in an open area, I could pull out, a lot of different lenses.
Louis, one of the things that I think gives this book a really nice lift to it also is that, I mean, it is a portrait book. It's called Face to Face. There's a portrait on the cover. And that is the crux of the material. One of the things that fascinates me though is your use of, and they're not never complex, but it'll be a doorway, there'll be a pattern, it'll be a texture on a stone wall or something like that. What is your mindset into including that in with the portrait material?
Well, I'm attracted to a wide range of subject matter, not just portraits. So you're right. The thrust of the book is portraits, face to face. But I did want to include uh, some of these doors and textures, as you say, because to me, it's so much a part of the city, so much a part of Marrakesh and the Medina. And I never really want to limit myself
Mm.
in that way. Um, I like, for example, what might be called still life as much, as faces and portraits and street shots in general. So I was glad I was able to get some of these in there as well. And then my designer, Sally, was able to incorporate some of these textures, like the mosaics and the
Mm.
tiling in some of the villas that you'd go into, are just fantastic. So she was able to incorporate it in things like the uh, end papers
Mhm.
and the dust jacket as well, the reverse of the dust jacket. So
Well, she did a fabulous job, and I think that's also worth giving a shout out to her on here because
yeah, I think so.
it's well, one, it's very difficult, and most people that you see doing books, especially as photographers, we're allowed to be control freaks sometimes because we can work alone. But people will try to attempt to be designers also, and either it falls flat, and it's very difficult to find a designer who does books well too, because she works. I'm going to say in monochrome as well because they're one color, they're very soft there in the background, but it really does give the book a really nice lift as you go through. Typography is excellent. She did a
Yeah,
fabulous
yeah.
job.
She very much complimented my work, and I'm very appreciative.
Have you guys worked together before? Do you kind of?
Yes, yeah. We worked together on several projects. She's helped me with my website, with graphic design in general. So yeah, we have a long-term relationship. I knew her originally when she was a art director in Miami agencies, and then of course she's moved around. She was in Los Angeles. Now she's up in Maine, but she's concentrated basically on these kind of things now. She's no longer in advertising, which is great.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I guess much like your project too. You're not in the commercial world, and you get to do
Yeah.
something that's beautiful and amazing.
Yeah, and to pick up on your point, my opinion is, I'm a photographer and appreciate good design. I have a collection
Right.
of photographic books, much like you have. But I would never attempt to do the design part, in
Yeah.
my, you know.
Well, it's interesting to see how that's evolved over the years too, because my recent thing in the last couple of years is, you know, I guess probably because of my age and where we are in time now, is that a lot of companies or publishers that will say, well, we'll re-release old books, and they're cleaned up in terms of design and all that. And part of me wanted to go for the real stuff, the vintage stuff. And so, you find these old books from the '60s, and they're very poorly designed. The printing is not anywhere near what you get today. And yeah, they're a little scrappy in spots. I think it was a big deal when Cartier-Bresson got Matisse to do that cover for
Oh,
Decisive Moment, but it still worked and it was in the context. And it's really cool to see, especially with designers who have the experience, the access to the technology we have with printing today to be able to do something that, and this is my compliment to her, it supports the work. It doesn't get in the way and it lifts it, and it's not over designed and it's not under designed. It's just right. And that's why I was wondering if you guys hadn't worked together before. That
yeah,
sometimes.
we have. And I would also mention Ralph Gibson did the forward.
I was getting ready to ask you about that. You and I
Okay.
have a mutual friend in Ralph, and I saw you wrote the
Yeah.
board of that. Tell me how that came about. That's an
Well,
interesting
that
story.
was, it was a great honor, because I've always thought of Ralph as not only just an incredible photographer, followed his career and owned many of his books, but he is someone who knows books and loves books. And, he did a photographic book, Ex Libris, on books. So,
Books.
I basically approached Bob Tursak, from the printing company, and who knew Ralph and has printed several of Ralph's books, and said, I'm trying to find somebody worthwhile to do the forward, and I know you know Ralph. Could you possibly run this by him? And he said, well, I could try, and he said, but I got to be honest with you, Ralph turns down most people. And in any case, I got an email several days later with an exchange of contact information. And next thing I know, I'm on the phone with Ralph, and I couldn't have been happier because his forward was very insightful.
It's nice.
Yeah, a very good writer. And I think he appreciated my work, and with the text, put it in a context of, classic documentary photography with some very good references to past works and some, yeah.
Follow-up question to that, though, I think would be interesting to get your thoughts on. One of the things I love about Ralph is that, with a long career, and I don't know if anybody can count how many books he's done. It's well over 30, I think, at this point. Um, for him, the book is a medium. You could say, well, I make photographs. Well, yeah, he makes books using
Yeah.
photography. And you've been through this process now, and it's lengthy, it's involved, it goes back to your portfolio of seeing how the work lives with itself, or, how the photographs juxtapose one another, how they feel with the flow. How do you feel about photography books as a medium now that you've been through the whole process on this?
Well, I mean, I think that it's for me, together with exhibitions, I've had a few. Um, I think it's ultimate expression of a project or, somebody's work. If you could put it into a book,
Mhm.
and it holds up. I mean, that for me is really where it's at, and also having an exhibit as well, and it's the book market today is a little tricky. I mean, this is self-published, and it's not inexpensive, but it's a labor of love for me.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I agree with you that the book market is very tricky these days.
Yeah,
We don't, I'm, when we remember back when there was a Borders on every big street in any
sure,
major city or a Barnes and
sure.
Noble, and the Barnes and Nobles are fewer and far between. And I remember, in the late 90s, even going in the early 2000s, and you go back to the photography section and it'd be multiple aisles of stuff. And you'd find all this great stuff just being, I didn't know this person existed. And, it'd be somebody you didn't. Michael Ken, I think, first came to my attention back then. And I did not know who he was. And then there'd be somebody famous like Ansel or somebody that you did know. And then that started dwindling and dwindling and dwindling. And now it's like not even a full shelf. It's like that's the photography section. So it's considerably different. But I do find it
Yeah,
interesting that, and I think this applies to your case, is that even though one could say the medium has some issues or that it's not relevant or all these things, at the same time it does. Like I mentioned earlier, that when people see a video of what I covered something years ago and they can't find the book anymore, there's a willingness, they want to go find it. And so it's an
yeah,
artistic statement of sorts.
absolutely.
But I mean, what possessed you to do this then? If this was, I'm curious.
Well, like I said, to me, it's like the highest form of, culmination of a project, that of all that hard work of, shooting and editing and, in my case, with what I do with the printing and testing and then the production of it. It's just something I wish I could do a lot more,
Yeah.
honestly.
Well, you have something to say.
Well, yeah, that's the idea. Hopefully, yeah.
You're one of the rare breed people who enjoys the Leica monochrome with no color option whatsoever. What's your attraction to the Leica monochrome?
Well, being a black and white photographer, I mean, the file's very pure. You're not doing any, you know, transference to color artificially through an app or, in Lightroom or anything like this. The files are just fantastic. And, of course, their lenses are so good. And, NEM, I mean, I do have an M11 color camera as well. So it's like one for each. So I like to keep it pure that way. And, you know, when I think about when I started with the M4, and it goes back obviously to M2, M3, in the 50s, that they were able to develop this digital camera with that same form factor.
Mhm.
And it's so compact. And that's really another thing about the Leica M, whether it's the color or the monochrome, it's just carrying that around, having, one lens or one lens and another lens. Especially in these confined areas, and it's a much more discreet camera than bringing, larger mirrorless or other cameras. It's very quiet. So it's the whole package, the whole combination. But, basically the monochrome for a black and white shooter, it doesn't get any better than that. I mean,
Agreed.
sure, there are some medium format on the high end which have done uh, monochromatic sensors, but they're huge.
Yeah, I remember Phase One did the achromatic. I don't remember. I don't think it was a 150, but it was a 100 megapixel sensor.
Right,
And
right. So it's just the whole package, already black and white, in that M, the rangefinder, just about everything about it.
well, man, I'm really excited to see this project come to fruition because, like I said, I get sent material from people, and usually that's the only time I hear from folks, and it's really cool to see where something went. because I really love the paisography portfolio that you sent, and it's fabulous. This may be too early to ask you since you're just wrapping this up. What do you see as next? Are you interested in more Marrakesh, or do you have other projects on the horizon? Or
Oh, absolutely. I have ongoing projects. I mean, one love is I used to live in Rio de Janeiro in the mid 80s, and I worked down there. I had a studio. Yeah, I was doing record album work when that was a big deal before
wow,
streaming and all that, and worked for advertising agencies in a couple magazines as well. And I always had personal work that I did from there. And I go back all the time. I was just there about a month ago. My wife and I went back and we were in Ipanema, renting an apartment there. And so that's an ongoing project. That's kind of more in color. And then there's Paris. So one of the things I would really like to do in the future, if it's possible, is possibly do another book just on my Paris stuff. And that would be black and white again. So yeah, I'm always, with these projects.
let me ask you too, because you do have a background running a commercial studio. The importance of personal projects and that's gotten you. I mean, this Marrakesh, the first time you went was before you had a camera.
Right.
And here we are today, finally manifesting this in a book form. I mean, that's there's a huge personal aspect of that, obviously,
Yeah,
that followed you all those years.
absolutely.
And personal projects always been a big part of
Oh yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
When I lived in Rio and had the studio there and was, working to make a living essentially,
sure.
um, I had a funny story. I studied as a young man when I got back from England before NYU started. I applied to Lisette Model's master class at Parsons New School. And she only took 12 people, and I was very pleased. You had to show a portfolio, and I got in. And this was toward the end of Lisette's life, but she was just an incredible teacher, incredible woman. And she liked my work, and she used to invite me to her West Village apartment. So I used to go by and show her new work and everything. And last time I saw her, she said, Lewis said, do me a favor, okay? Don't sell out. Don't become a commercial photographer. She said, drive a taxi. So, years later, a few years later, I realized in New York I wasn't cut out to drive a taxi. And, I ended up doing commercial work. I love Lisette dearly, and she was a big influence on me. But I ended up, you know, having a career to support myself. And I kept personal projects on the side. So when I was in Rio, I ended up falling in love with a very beautiful area called Lapa, which was this kind of bohemian area with gamblers, and they had prostitutes and dance halls and a very lively area. And I was basically walking around for a year, well, not every day, but when I had time, with a 4x5 field camera and some color negative film and documenting it. So I did an exhibit, actually, the curator of a newly opened cultural center in Ipanema, right on the beach, ended up seeing the work, and she invited me to do the first one-man photography show there
Mm.
about this area, Lapa. So I've always kept through the years, these kind of personal projects. It's what I live for. And so when I kind of retired and sold my last studio in 2011, I just devoted myself to really going back and doing what I love,
I think it's safe to say Lizette would be proud of you at this point, but
Well, you know, yeah, I think so. And what her mantra was, and is often quoted, was, and she always said it in the negative, is never photograph anything unless you're absolutely passionate about it. And I turn it around and say, well, photograph what you love, photograph what you are passionate, not don't photograph. And that's what, these places, Marrakech, Rio, Paris, I'm captivated by the light in these places in Rio, which is very different from, Marrakech, which says there's incredible, very different light in it, and has inspired a lot of artists from, the French painter Delacroix to Matisse
yeah.
through several centuries. So that's my whole view of the personal project thing.
I love it. That's incredible. And man, seriously, it's really cool to see this. So this is I'm very happy for you. Congratulations. And
Thank you.
I'll put links in the show description too if anybody's interested in getting this book. There are many copies, and get it now while it's in print. And
Right. They're 500, so it might not, last the whole
it's
first
limited
edition.
edition. Well, that's
Yeah.
it's funny. I tell people this on in videos all the time. I've done the channel for 15, no, longer than that, since 2008 now. So, but in the early days, I would review people's books, known photographers, and it's funny. People will see those videos today, and then they try to find a used copy, and it's long out of print. And of course, I don't know that they actually sell them, but used dealers will gouge if they think there's a demand for something. And yeah, it's just fascinating to me. So I had a really good friend when I worked at the museum years ago, and he would buy two copies of everything when he'd find it. I don't know if he ever made a fortune selling his second copies, but
Yeah.
it's how the business works. But Louis, thank you so much. This has been an
Thank
honor
you.
to be able to talk to you.
And thank you very much.